right, hello everyone. I'm Alex, and I am going to run a workshop on an introduction to procedural modeling in Houdini. So, one second. What is Houdini? Houdini is essentially what you could guess, procedural generation software, mostly modeling, but there's a lot of VFX and all animation also done in Houdini. So Houdini, you just go through the Houdini launcher. I'm using Houdini Apprentice, which is the free version. Is anyone here planning to follow along on their own computer? Cool. So I'm going to go a bit faster since no one's following along. So Houdini is going to boot up in a second, but I've been using Houdini for around a year now. And one thing I will say about Houdini is that the learning curve is very steep and it's not beginner friendly at all. So it's good to know someone or have tutorials that kind of does a good overview of Houdini, because when I started, I had no idea what was going on, and it took a lot of tutorials to understand how things work. So today we're going to procedurally generate a neighborhood block. It's going to be very basic, so I have half an hour, but it'll kind of show the capabilities of procedural generation in Houdini. Quick overview of the layout of Houdini. So here you have your 3D viewer. Another thing to note is in Houdini, you use space, not Alt. Alt sometimes works with this, but Alt does not work here. See, if I'm holding Alt, press the select, where here I can move around with space. So space to move around in your views. Here's your main menus, 3D viewer, as I said. This is where, when you have like a node you're editing, all of the information for that pops up. And then here is like your network box that you can see all of your nodes. Houdini is node-based, so we're going to be stringing a bunch of nodes together to generate everything. Another important control is tab. So when you're in the network box and you press tab, it opens up the tab menu, which shows you which nodes you can create. So I'm going to start off with create. And then instead of a plane in Houdini, it's called a grid. Another thing to note is cylinders are tubes. Now that I've created a grid, you can see it if I zoom out. And then another thing I want to show now that I have something is what some of these buttons here do. So this here shows you where all your points are. This will show you, your normals for the points. Then this is another set of normals. Here you can get numbers for your points. Sorry, this is trails, that's not important. This is the normals, my bad. But this is normals for the primitives. So that's like your big, like your object itself, the faces, those are considered primitives. Then you can also look at your primitive numbers. So as you can see, this is the grid, we have like this many faces. And those are just important things to know that I'll be toggling back and forth with to look at what I'm doing. So right now, we're in the object view. What we want to do is get into this object and get into its component, essentially. So in the geometry box, essentially. So now we have this grid. And if you notice, I have all of these abilities here that I can edit. So to start off with our grid, I'm gonna just want to make it, okay, cool. So we're planning to make like a street. So let's say for size, 20, I think I want it by 6. And then for rows, 4. So the idea here is that here we're going to have the houses, here we're going to have the houses, in between it's going to be the road. And then columns is 10. We're going to adjust these values later though. So now I have my grid. Now let's make some houses. So I press tab, and now I'm going to just go to create box. So now you'll notice that you can't see the box. This is because it is not selected to be viewed. So this blue, if this is blue, it means show this. So, but you still probably want to see the grid for reference, so you can press this pink, which shows you like a wireframe of it. So the issue with this box, you'll notice, is that it doesn't look like our grid in terms of sizing. And in Houdini, when you're generating things, you want things to match up in their sizing. So what we're going to do is basically have the box size be controlled by the grid information. So this is called parameter references. So this is where Houdini becomes a lot more technical versus like something like Maya, where we're going to think about variables and use like the term we're going to use is parameters, which artists aren't as familiar with, but essentially the idea is here is I have a number here, and I want to reference that number here. Any questions about that? Because I know artists are a bit less familiar with these terms. Okay, cool. So getting parameter references is pretty simple as long as you know how to do it. What you do is you go here, copy parameter, then you go here, and here you don't do paste values, you do paste relative reference. And you'll notice that it says CH, blah, 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 and it's basically showing you where in the Houdini network it's getting this information. And now you've noticed this is massive. This is not what we want. So that's because I just took the entire size of the entire grid. But what I'm going to want to do is, I want to take the columns count and divide the X size, like this size, by the columns. So I'm going to copy this parameter, go into here. Another thing to note is you can toggle number view versus formula view, like that, and we'll just press divide, and then paste relative reference, and now that's a lot smaller. Another thing I do here, though, is I want to subtract 1, because that will actually have it fit. It's kind of, now you can tell, like here, that's what it looks like with the -1, where without it, it's a bit smaller, and that has to do with just like the whole idea of like things starting at like 0 and like the way that word works. So here, and then we're gonna do similar thing for this value here. So traditionally, this is your Y value, but due to a step we're gonna do later, the axes are a bit out of order. So if you noticed here, when I was changing what should be my X is changing my Z. So this, which usually is considered Y, is actually going to be X. So here, the way we're gonna work is we're gonna get the grid size Y of this, go here, paste that in, and then we're gonna divide that by rows. Yes, we're gonna divide that by rows. So notice that things disappeared because I have an error. That's because I didn't finish my expression. So, and then just put in that -1. And now see how that is, oh no, that, okay, yeah. So notice how this doesn't look right? It didn't match the grid like I said it would. That's because when we do our next step, everything is gonna be rotated. So this is fine. All right, so now we have our box, in theory, matching the size of our grid. And one thing to note is that here, notice how it changes when I change this value. So that's the whole beauty of procedural generation, is everything's built on top of each other. So as I change the columns, my house size now changes, so I don't have to go through and resize everything. So now what we're gonna want to do is essentially copy all of this block to all of the points on the grid to make our row of houses. So I'm gonna press tab, and I'm just gonna search for copy to points. And then now I get this copy to points node. The first thing it takes is the geometry to copy. So I'm gonna make this visible. I want it to copy from box 1. Then the points to copy, it is copying from grid. So now for every point in the grid, we have a box, and notice that now they're the right size. And as I said before, if I like adjust, things change. Cool. So now this does not look anything like a neighborhood. One thing being that the houses are literally on top of each other, or not on top of each other, but right next to each other, and houses usually have some level of a yard. So to make the houses not literally on each other, we're going to add a transform. The reason why we don't scale it here is that we want this to reference the grid size, so as we change the grid, it stays within relative reference of the grid, but then later we can go and transform it here. So transform, sorry. And then this will scale what we already calculated. And here we can bring the scale down, and now we have houses that look more like houses. the other thing we're going to want to do is, if you notice, these houses are in between the plane. So we want to change that. So we're going to change the translations of the house. So here, we're going to want to essentially put the house like up on the grid. So the way we're going to do that is to do $, and we're going to get the X min. So this is how tall the house is, right? So one thing to note is on the X axis. One thing to remember is that our like vertices and stuff like that, not vertices, sorry, our directions are a bit flipped. So like, I guess if I were to go in this view, then it would look like it was moving X. And then the other thing with this is that you'll notice that it doesn't account for the scale. So we're also just going to want to multiply it by, here I'm just going to grab the scale value. You just do ch ... / and then scale, and that will just get the universal scale, and then close it up. And that will help just in case we need to reference that. Then I can literally just take this, copy it, and I'm just going to put it in this, and then instead of X min, I'm going to do Y. Give me a second, I have an error because I deleted the $, and I accidentally opened this. There we go, cool. So now, this is going to actually need to be Y max. Why did it go? Okay. And then this one we do the same, but this is also going to be a max, so Z max. And then see how now everything is perfectly on the flat plane. Perfect. All right. Now the other problem we have with this is that, well, there's no road, right? I said earlier that we're going to have like one column be the road. That doesn't exist. So what we want to do is select a few points from our grid to spawn houses on, not all of them. So I'm going to go to tab, and I'm going to do group by group by range. So what this is going to do is create a group of points that are within a range we specify. So let's call this group house points. And then here at the type is primitives, we're going to want to do points because we're doing points. And then if I go here, we can actually see what's selected in yellow. So we're going to want to do all of them. So end is going to be 30. And then here, and we're going to want to do start end. Was there 40 points here? My God, 40. And then here, we're going to want to select half of half, essentially. So we're going to want to select 10 of 20. And notice how that gets these lines. Cool. So now we have our group. So now when we go to copy to points, we can choose to do it. Oh yeah, here, target points, we can put that group. And now it has these houses. The one thing you'll notice is, look, that's falling off. That's not great. So we can go back to our group and adjust it. So let's do 9, right? That takes the wrong house off. So what you're going to want to do is add a offset of 1, and now everything is back to how we wanted it to be. So now, all right, so now we're ready to make controls and do the actual, like, where the magic happens with Houdini. So the way this works is we're going to go to, actually, one thing I want to do before is, one thing you notice is you see the houses, but not the grid, right? And we want to show the ground. So a way to do this is you just do merge. And what a merge will do is anything you feed into it, it will show. So I'm going to feed in that grid, press view, and now I can see. And then we notice that these are falling off. What happened to the grid? Right, okay. So that is not great, right? We want these to be on the other side. So we can just go back to our transform, and it's probably one of these just needs to be a min. So There we go. So I changed the Y to a min, now they're both on. Okay, now let's make controls. So to make controls, you make a null. This basically is just a node that has nothing, and we're gonna add stuff to it. And then I always like to name my node just like control like that. Then from here, you go to this settings and you do edit parameter interface. So now this pops up this lovely window where it essentially shows you what parameters exist, which are pretty much none here, and allows you to add them. So we're gonna want controls for the houses and the road. So let's make a folder. We can call this like house control house, sorry, house. And then right now it's just set to be tabs, but you could change like how it works. And then I'm gonna press apply and notice how that just popped up right there. Now I can add a new one, and this one is just gonna be called like brown, and then brown controls, and then apply. So now we have our two controls. Now let's get the values we want into our controls into the controls. So the way you do this is, let's start with ground controls. I can go here, and I want to be able to control the number of houses, right? So if you notice here, when I do this, it adds and ends houses. Also notice we have a slight issue that we're gonna have to fix, where because we set it to the preset number of the original grid, the houses start spawning in the road. So we're gonna go back and fix that in a second. But first, let's just make this reference. You can really just drag this to ground controls, and now it will pop up in there. And then when I press apply, it's now referenced here. And then in here, this is now a reference. So now let's go back and fix that issue with the stuff spawning. So with the group, essentially what we're gonna want is we're gonna want to select not 9, but number of houses -1. So we can just reference from this. Oh, let's rename this, sorry, step back. I wanna just name this so it's clear. Or let's just call this like house per side. And then the label is just what you see on the interface, so I can face it out per side. Cool. Then we want house per side to be in here. So we can just drag that to there. Oh no, it doesn't like that, never mind. Okay, so now I can just go ch // control, it will autofill there. And then we're gonna do house per side, close that up, -1. So now you'll notice, and then we want this value to also be controlled by that, because it's like, you know, it's basically number of houses you want -1 out of twice the number of houses you want. So we can literally just copy and paste this value. And now we have that. And then now what happens is, I'm just gonna quickly save, I never saved it. So you basically just save it as a .hit. So I'm just gonna call this like demo1. And then, okay, so then from here, we can now go back to our control and change the number of houses, and notice that it's a little bit better, but not quite right. So see how like we get cut off? That's because back in the group, we just have it end at 40. What we want it to do is essentially end at the number of houses times, here we have 4 columns. So actually we're gonna wanna do the number of columns. So ch / and then we're gonna look at grid 1 columns. Or is it rows? What we'll see in a second. Yeah, so it's rows. My bad. Rows. So now that's 52, which would make sense because we said we wanted in our here 13 houses. So now that scales perfectly. All right, perfect. So now we've made our control for the like landscape itself. Now let's just do a house control. So back to controls. I already have that open. I'm going to open this and just take uniform scale, put it in house control, and then just call this like house scale. Apply, accept, that window will disappear. And now I can adjust how big the houses are. Notice that if you make it too big, it will go out of bounds, but we're pretty much done. We've now made a generative city block that we can control how big the houses are and how many houses there are. And then another thing we can add actually is how big the grid itself is. So if we go back to ground controls, we can go to here, just plop this in, and now you can choose how big the grid is. You can just call this like ground size. Perfect. One like fancy tidbit you can go through. You don't like how this looks at a color node. And I could just like go here and be like, hey, make the road colored. And that just makes it nicer to look at. And then in general, what you're gonna want to do is select your nodes, go to layout, layout all, so they're a bit cleaner. I always then just adjust it a bit because I like having my control in this hand, and I feel like it gives you a bit too much space. I'm fine like having this stuff a bit closer. And then it's always a good idea to change your names to mean something to you later. So like scale and place house, right? Another thing I want to note is with these like radial controls you see when you go like here, this obviously I said shows you how to view it. Another one that's good to know is actually, if I go back here, this yellow takes it, basically undoes that node, like it ignores it, bypasses it. So notice how like it's as if I never did that transformation. This is really good if you wanted to try out like two different transformations. So, like if I went here and I did like alt, which copies that node, and then I hid this one. And then I was like, actually, I want to put, or let's see, let's look at this, right? And you're like, I want to change the scale, or sorry, that's being weird. Why is it not? Oh, it's not hooked in, that's why. So if you notice, it didn't get fully hooked. There you go. So one thing you'll notice here is like, I don't know, maybe you want the houses to be, you want to see what it looked like with a different scale. I don't know. You could do that and that hides that one. Or if you bring that back, it applies both. So you might want to then hide that one to see other things. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And like you notice, oh, I don't like this node anymore. You can just delete it and no harm done. I think that is everything I wanted to go over. So any questions? Yes.
Like the basic objects in there, like other objects that we made?
Yeah, so I've actually am working on that for a different class. And it's a bit annoying, but basically you can import FBXs, and then a good tool to know is there's this thing called object merge, which allows you to take an object from like a different part of the scene and reference it. So this will do really nothing for us because we have no other objects, but if I did have other objects, you could use that to reference them. Yes.
I don't know how to phrase it, but what do you mean?
Yeah, so to export it, you can go to like your final node, and then you go to, save geometry, and then you can save it as like an OBJ. There are plugins to put it into engines and like allow it to be like use the controls and all of that. I don't know if Apprentice allows that because I haven't tried that yet. But I believe, if I remember from my research, that might be one of the things that Houdini Apprentice can be the paid version for. Yes.
So we saw this example of how to make like a town landscape. What are some of like the other common applications somebody might use this tool for?
So I always think of it as like anything that I know I'm going to be changing a lot of details on that I'm going to want to have like that node graph for. It really depends. Usually you use it for something pretty grand scale just to get used to the software. I have been doing smaller things, but one thing I can show you is like, sure, okay, here. If I open up this is something else I've made. It will open. Here we go. So I've made this bird. It's loading in, there we go. So I was trying to like make a scene and all of that, but here with the bird, it's very complicated, as you can see, but Houdini was really nice for like, you know, with the wings, it's that same piece like copied over and over again and like adjusting that. And here I have like these like network boxes, which just kind of show like this is all part of one section and like are named. And actually this is where I used the this is one of the places I've used that out thing where it says merge all, and essentially anything that I labeled /out, it merges into this merge. Nick, you had a question? Yes, so Houdini is a bit weird with randomization because if you're a programmer, you're used to, I put in a random and I get a random out. Houdini is like, this number corresponds to this number from the random formula. Like so if you put like random 5, you're always gonna get the same number back. So there's ways to like fiddle with it where like if you're in a for loop, you take the number of like your iteration number. So I can show a little bit of that if I go to, where's the CV? Here, as you notice, like these seaweed are not uniform. And that's because somewhere in this mess, oh, another thing that's good to know about, not to mention, is you can press F to zoom in on a node. So here's my for each. Let's see. I'm gonna go to, there's also this attribute randomize, which kind of does like a bit of stuff, or this is attribute wrangle, my bad, sorry, which like allows you to change some attributes across the thing. So here I have a shape ramp, which essentially is, it's really hard to see with all these already made out, but like it changes like the thickness of the seaweed across like the line. But here I like forget somewhere in here, I would have to go through this. Oh, here's it. There is an attribute randomize, which also like for certain things you can like randomize, but it's more difficult. But there is a way, it just takes a bit more finagling. Yeah, here, this is like a for each loop where you have this and you have like this metadata, which tells you like how long it's been. Here, I copied to points using a spiral. So that's how it gets like the overall spiral shape. Any other questions?